Hello, I am Philippe Girard, and I am a professor in the History Department at McNeese State University.
And I'm Janet Alluret, and I'm also a professor in the History Department at McNeese State University. Welcome to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS, where we explore the lives of famous women in history.
Welcome and bienvenue à nos amis francophones. Ceci est la radio de l'Université McNeese.
On the program today, music and history as we retrace the life of a remarkable woman. She endured much pain, both physical and emotional, and yet she became Mexico's most celebrated 20th century artist. Her name was Frida Kahlo.
But first, some music. We will start with the king of Mambo himself, the Cuban-Mexican singer Pérez Prado. This is Mambo number 5, much better than number 1 through 4. That sure makes you want to dance. This was Mambo number 5 by Pérez Prado. Welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks. I am Philippe Girard.
And I'm Janet Alluret. Today we're looking at the life of the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. She was born in July 1907.
Well, actually, she claimed that she was born in July 1910 as a way to make her life coincide with the onset of the Mexican Revolution. She was born in the city of Coyoacán in the Casa Azul, the Blue House.
That house is where she was born, where she lived, and where she died. She's actually still there today. She asked to be cremated, and the urn containing her ashes is on display in that house.
And the city of Coyoacán played an important role in the history of Mexico because this is where Hernán Cortés lived for a while during the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire in the 1500s.
And this is where his concubine La Malinche lived. We covered her life in an earlier program.
Nowadays, Coyoacán has been eaten up by the urban sprawl, and it is a part of Mexico City. But you can still visit the Blue House of Frida Kahlo, as well as the house of her lover, Leon Trotsky. But I'm getting ahead of the story here.
Kahlo grew up in a very female household. Her father had 2 daughters from a first marriage and another 4 daughters, including Frida, from his second wife.
Her father was born in Germany. He was possibly of Jewish descent. Her mother was Mexican, of Hispanic and indigenous descent. And that diverse background at the crossroads of Europe and the Americas would become a source of artistic inspiration for Frida Kahlo.
Pain also inspired her art, and from the outset she endured a lot of it. She was possibly born with spina bifida. Then, as a child, she contracted polio, which left her with one leg shorter than the other. She hid this under a large traditional Mexican dress.
In 1925, she endured a terrible trolley accident. During the accident, the handrail from the trolley essentially impaled her. And she also suffered multiple fractures in her leg, her foot, her collarbone, her spine. She was just 18 at the time.
She spent 3 months in a full body cast and had to be bedridden for parts of her life after that. In all, she went through 35 operations, and she suffered 3 miscarriages because she could never have kids.
Let's take a second musical break with a song that is itself full of pain and sorrow. It is inspired by the Mexican legend of La Llorona, a woman who mourns the death of her children, which is fitting for our story today. It is sung by Chavela Vargas, who lived in Mexico, and she knew Frida Kahlo personally.
Me dicen el negro, llorona, negro, pero cariñoso. Todos me dicen el negro, llorona, negro, pero cariñoso. Yo soy como el chile verde, llorona, picante, pero sabroso. Yo soy como el chile verde, llorona, picante, pero sabroso. Ay, de mi llorona, 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 llévame al río, tápame con tu rebozo, llorona, porque me muero de frío. Te quiero, quieres, llorona, quieres que te quiera más. Si ya te he dado la vida, llorona, ¿qué más quieres? ¿Quieres más?
Welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. I'm Janet Alured.
And I am Philippe Girard. You just listened to La Llorona, sung by Chavela Vargas.
Today, we explore the life of Frida Kahlo, who suffered a terrible accident when she was an 18-year-old in Mexico City.
And after that accident, she had to remain in bed for months to recover. And she took up painting to occupy her time.
What was just a hobby at first eventually became her life.
Her art is difficult to classify. Some people say it is Mexican folk art because she was never formally trained and her technique shows it, but it is far more elaborate than just that.
Her art is also associated with the Surrealist movement because she knew many Surrealists and her art has an otherworldly quality. But she rejected that label, saying, "I never painted dreams, I painted my own reality."
And she was also inspired by the painter Diego Rivera, but only to some extent. Rivera did large murals about the history and the politics of Mexico. She did small pieces that were introspective and focused on intimate issues like her pain and her miscarriages.
She said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." In all, of the 140 paintings she did, 55 are self-portraits.
And the pain that nourished her art was physical but also emotional because of her rocky relationship with the painter Diego Rivera.
They first met in 1927 when he was already a famous muralist. He was 21 years older than Frida, supremely fat, and a known womanizer. So Frida's mother warned her to stay away from that man. Instead, they got married in 1929.
And both were artists with fiery temperaments, so the marriage was eventful. to say the least. Diego had multiple affairs with other women, including Frida's own sister, Cristina, which really broke her heart.
I bet. She responded with affairs of her own, both with men and women, including the famous black dancer Josephine Baker.
Diego and Frida divorced in 1939 after 10 years of marriage, and yet they couldn't stay apart, so they remarried a year later.
Their living quarters were symbolic of that complicated yet symbiotic relationship. He had a house right next to hers in Coyoacán. The two houses were joined by a bridge so that they could see each other anytime and yet live separately.
We're going to head for the United States now and leave Coyoacán because the Rivera spent most of their time there between 1930 and 1934. And our next musical guest also went from Mexico to the United States, and this will be Carlos Santana and his classic rendition of Oye Como Va. This was a 1970 version of Oye Como Va by Carlos Santana.
Welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS.
Today, we cover the life of Frida Kahlo, the Mexican artist and wife of Diego Rivera.
In 1930, Diego received an invitation to go paint a mural in San Francisco. The couple moved there for a few months, and Frida very much enjoyed the artsy and free-spirited atmosphere of that city.
There are a few artifacts of her visit today in San Francisco, including a mural by Diego Rivera, which is at the San Francisco Stock Exchange.
The couple was back in the U.S. in 1931 when the Museum of Modern Art organized a great exhibit in Diego's honor in New York City. The couple was treated as honored guests, but Frida was unimpressed. The Great Depression was in full swing, and she found it shocking to attend lavish parties hosted by the rich and famous when the country was experiencing so much poverty.
Even today, the Museum of Modern Art has 90 works by Diego Rivera in its collection, and then another 3 by Frida Kahlo herself.
From there, the couple moved to Detroit, where Diego had gotten other commissions.
And her time in Detroit was not pleasant. She didn't like the town, and she suffered another devastating miscarriage in 1932. That miscarriage is the subject of her most poignant painting, Henry Ford Hospital, which she painted on a sheet of metal to emphasize how cold that industrial city felt to her.
Diego had problems of his own during his stay in the U.S. When doing a mural for the Rockefeller Center, he chose to include a portrait of Lenin and other communist themes. His patrons didn't appreciate that, and they fired him.
He kind of expected that reaction, so he had painted the mural directly on the plaster of the wall rather than on a canvas, so that it couldn't possibly be removed. But that didn't stop the Rockefellers. They simply had the mural chiseled off the wall.
So you can't see the original today, but Diego made a copy of it in Mexico City when he came back home, and that one you can see.
Or you can listen to our next song entitled, appropriately enough, The Rockefeller Skank by Fatboy Slim.
Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, the Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, the Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, the Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, about now. Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, Funk Soul Brother. Right about now. Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, 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 now. Right about now, 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 now. Right about now, 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 now. Right about now, 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 now. Right about now, now, now. now, 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 right about now, 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 right about right about now. Funk Soul Brother, check it out now. Funk Soul Brother, right about now. Funk Soul Brother, check it out now. Funk Soul Brother, right about now. Funk Soul Brother, check it out now. Funk Soul Brother, right about now. Funk Soul Brother, check it out now. Funk Soul Brother.
This was the Rockefeller Skank, released by Fat Boy Slim in 1998.
Fun fact, did you know that Fat Boy Slim is not his real name?
I figured that.
His real name is Norman Cook, and I happen to be friend with his dad. This is how I know.
Oh. Let's get back to our topic today, the life of Frida Kahlo.
We covered the terrible injuries that she suffered as a young woman, her rocky marriage to Diego Rivera, the famous muralist, and then their frustrating visit to the United States in the 1930s.
After returning from the U.S., she settled back in her childhood home near Mexico City.
And that's where she met the Russian communist Leon Trotsky. And he had just had a falling out with Stalin in Russia, and that's why he had fled to Mexico City.
The Riveras were communist sympathizers, and so they welcomed Trotsky in their house.
And that created a whole set of problems because Frida then had an affair with Trotsky.
She did get around. Another person who wasn't a fan of Trotsky was Joseph Stalin. He sent a team of assassins all the way to Mexico City, and one of them ended up killing Trotsky in his own house with a mountaineer's
ice pick.
Frida Kahlo had problems of her own, unfortunately. Her leg had to be amputated due to gangrene. Then she suffered a debilitating bout of pneumonia, and then she grew addicted to painkillers like morphine.
And she died in 1957 at the young age of 47.
But she left quite a legacy.
She wasn't that well known in her lifetime. She only had one show in the US and another one in France. The Louvre Museum in Paris bought one of her pieces, which was the first time they had bought a painting by any Mexican artist. But aside from that, she lived in the shadow of Diego Rivera.
This has changed a lot since the 1970s, though.
Her life and her art check all the right boxes. She celebrated Mexico's Native American heritage. She was an independent woman, which made her a cult figure to feminists. She had a tragic but fascinating life, and the success of the movie Frida in 2002 also helped, of course.
Good movie. By the time the 100th anniversary of her birth came along, she was an international star. The U.S. Postal Service even issued a stamp in her honor, and Google changed its logo for the day.
And Mexico also organized a huge retrospective of her work for the occasion. She used to be known as the wife of Diego Rivera in her lifetime, and now usually is introduced as the husband of Frida Kahlo.
If you want to own one of her paintings, be prepared to sign a big check. One of them sold recently for $5.6 million at Sotheby's. That was in 2006.
A cheaper option would be to visit the Casa Azul in Coyoacán, where she was born and where she died. And it's now a museum in her honor, and it has an extensive collection of her works, which you can see for a much cheaper price. And we will end our musical selection with another woman of Mexican descent whose life ended much too soon. I'm speaking here of Selena Quintanilla Perez. This is Como la Flor.
Si en mí no encontraste
This was Como la Flor by Selena. My name is Philippe Girard.
And I'm Janet Alured. This has been your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. We just retraced the life of Frida Kahlo.
Merci, and thank you for joining us.
This program was funded by a Juliet Hartner Grant for Women in the Humanities. For more information on how to help finance fellowships at McNeese, contact the foundation at 337-475-5588.
This program was also sponsored by the History Department at McNeese. If you want to apply for a degree in history or any other field, contact the McNeese Admissions Office at 337-475-5504.
Or look us up on the web, mcneese.edu. Goodbye.
Au revoir.
Por el camino del sitio mío, un carretero alegre pasó. Con sus canciones que muy sentida y muy guajira alegre cantó. Me voy al transbordador, bam, bam, a descargar la carreta. Me voy al transbordador, bam, bam, a descargar la carreta, bam, bam, para cumplir con la meta, bam, bam, de mi pequeña labor. A caballo vamos pa'l monte, a caballo vamos pa'l monte, a caballo vamos pa'l monte, a caballo vamos pa'l monte. Sálvate, Juanito. La viene Nicolo. Yo trabajo sin reposo, bam, bam, para poderme casar, que bam, yo bam, trabajo sin reposo, bam, bam, para poderme casar, bam, y si lo llego